Hey family, welcome back to Black Queen Revenge. We've got a unique story for you today, full of emotion and real-life drama. If you love these stories, please like, comment, subscribe, and share your ideas for future videos. So, let's begin. The digital numbers glowed in the dark room, a sickly red that seared itself into her vision. 105.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Alara's breath hitched, the simple plastic thermometer feeling like a live wire in her hand. Next to her, in the vast, too-quiet bed, Leo whimpered, his 4-year-old body radiating a terrifying heat. His pajamas were damp, his curls plastered to his forehead, and his breathing was a shallow, rapid flutter against the Egyptian cotton sheets. "Shh, baby, Mama's here," Alara whispered, her voice trembling as she reached for the lukewarm cloth in the basin beside the bed. The clock on the nightstand read 1:17 a.m. The silence of their penthouse, high above the glittering city, was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the climate control and Leo's ragged breaths. She'd been battling the fever since evening, using every trick she knew from the pediatric first aid courses she'd taken. Cool compresses, children's fever reducer, gentle reassurances. But the numbers kept climbing. A primal fear, cold and slick, coiled in her stomach. This wasn't a typical bug. As she wiped his neck, Leo's eyes, previously glazed with fever, suddenly rolled back. His small limbs stiffened, then began to jerk in a horrifying rhythmic dance. A seizure. "Leo! No, 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 baby!" Panic, sharp and blinding, sliced through her. The first aid facts she'd memorized scrambled in her head. Side. Keep him on his side. Her hands, clumsy with terror, managed to roll his convulsing body. "It's okay. You're okay," she chanted, a useless mantra against the violent tremors racking his tiny frame. The seizure seemed to last an eternity, though it was likely only 30 seconds. When it stopped, Leo lay utterly limp, his skin grayish. The hospital. Now. Her phone was on the charger. She snatched it, her fingers leaving sweaty smears on the glass. She didn't think. She tapped the familiar face, the contact labeled with a heart. Julian. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each trill was a hammer blow to her chest. "Pick up. Please pick up." On the 5th ring, a click. Julian's voice, thick with sleep and irritation, grated in her ear. "Alara, do you know what time it is? I have the Davidson presentation at 7. The sound of his voice, so normally a comfort, now felt like a betrayal. She choked on a sob. "Julian, come home. It's Leo. His fever is over 105. He just had a seizure. I need you. I need to get him to the hospital." A beat of silence, then a sigh, heavy with exasperation. "A seizure? Are you sure? He was fine when I left. Did you give him the Tylenol like I said? You're probably overreacting." The words sucked the air from her lungs. "I'm not overreacting. He's burning up and he's not responding right. Please, Julian. I'm scared." Another pause. In the background, she heard it. Not the rustle of hotel sheets or the quiet of a home office. She heard the faint, crystalline clink of ice in a glass. A low, muffled laugh that was decidedly not masculine. "Look," Julian said, his voice dropping to a hushed, impatient whisper. "I can't just leave. This is a critical deal. The client is right here. Call an ambulance or call your mother. Handle it." "Julian, he's your son. And you're his mother," he shot back, the whisper turning harsh. "Figure it out. I'm busy." Then, clearly not covering the receiver, his voice shifted, becoming warm, intimate. "Sorry about that, darling. Just domestic drama. Now, where were we?" The line went dead. Alara stood frozen, the dial tone a shrill scream in the silent room. The cold fear in her gut solidified into something else, something dark and hard. Domestic drama. Their son's life? A drama? But the ice in her veins melted under a fresh wave of terror as Leo let out a weak, mewling cry. There was no time for the shattering of her world. She moved on pure instinct. She bundled Leo in his thickest blanket, her own silk robe insufficient against the chill of the air conditioning and her own dread. She ran to the elevator, barefoot, praying the night doorman was at his post. The elevator descent was a nausea-inducing clunge. "Carlos!" she gasped, stumbling into the marbled lobby where the elderly doorman was reading a paper. "My son! Hospital! I need a taxi! Now!" Carlos took one look at Leo's lifeless form in her arms and sprang into action, blowing his whistle and running into the rain-streaked street. A taxi, thankfully idle at this hour, pulled up. Alara slid in, clutching Leo. "St. Jude's Children's. Fast. Please." The city blurred past the rain-streaked window. She held Leo's face against her neck, feeling his scorching skin, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. All the while, Julian's dismissive tone, that other laugh, played on a loop. The emergency room was a jarring cacophony of light and sound. Nurses converged, their professional calm a stark contrast to her raw panic. Leo was taken from her arms onto a gurney, whisked through swinging doors. A doctor, with kind, tired eyes, asked rapid-fire questions. How long has the fever been this high? Has he been vomiting? Any history of seizures? Alara answered mechanically, her eyes glued to the door that had swallowed her child. The doctor's face grew graver. "We're going to run some tests. It could be meningitis. We need to act quickly." Meningitis? The word echoed, a death knell. A social worker approached, clipboard in hand. "Is the father on the way?" Alara looked at her, seeing not the woman's sympathetic face, but Julian's annoyed expression, hearing the clink of that glass. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "He's not coming." She was left alone in a sterile waiting room, a vinyl chair cold through her thin clothes. The enormity of it all crashed down. Julian's absence wasn't just about a business deal. The client, the laugh, the intimate darling, he was with someone else. While Leo fought for his life, his father was with another woman? A savage, unfamiliar rage began to burn through the fear. She pulled out her cracked phone, not to call Julian again. Instead, she opened a private social media account, one she used to follow art galleries and chefs, and, secretly, to monitor the social circle of Evelyn Shaw, Julian's ambitious, flawlessly beautiful new partner. Evelyn's private story was still live, a video shot in a dim, luxurious bar. The camera panned over a bottle of vintage Dom Pignon, then settled on a man's hand resting on a silk-clad knee. On his wrist was a vintage Cartier Santos Dumont, a watch she'd found in a Parisian flea market on their honeymoon, a gift for his first big promotion. The caption, in elegant script over the video, "Midnight strategy sessions are the most productive. #partner goals. #winning team." Strategy sessions. Her son was convulsing, and Julian was having a strategy session? The rage crystallized into a plan, cold and sharp. She wasn't just Alara the worried mother, or Alara the supportive wife who'd put her own art curation career on hold. She was Alara Vance, and the Vances did not crumble. She made 2 calls. The first was to her brother, Silas, a man who operated in shadows Julian couldn't even conceive of. "Si, I need a discreet sweep. Julian's phone, his expenses, his movements tonight. Everything. And I need access to the secure server at his firm, the one he thinks I don't know about." The second call was to her godmother, Agatha, a legendary divorce attorney whose name struck fear into the hearts of unfaithful spouses. "Aunt Aggie," Alara said, her voice now steady, eerily calm, "it's time. The prenup we drew up, the one with the fidelity clause and the full audit trigger, I'm activating it. And I want more. I want him dismantled." Agatha's response was immediate. "I'll freeze the joint accounts and the business lines of credit within the hour. The papers will be at the penthouse by dawn. Where are you?" "St. Jude's. Leo's. It's bad." A pause, then Agatha's voice softened, but lost none of its steel. "Focus on Leo, darling. Leave the jackals to me." Hours later, just as a pale dawn lightened the sky, a doctor emerged. Leo had bacterial meningitis. It had been touch and go, but the powerful antibiotics were working. He was stable, but in the pediatric ICU. He would have a long recovery. Ilara wept, but they were tears of fury as much as relief. She walked into the PICU, a masked and gowned figure amidst the beeping machines. She took Leo's small, IV-taped hand. "I'm here, my brave boy, and I'm going to make sure nothing and no one ever hurts you again." She texted Julian a single, cold line. "Leo has bacterial meningitis. He's in the PICU at St. Jude's. Visiting hours are restricted." His reply came 10 minutes later. "Oh my God, I'm on my way. Why didn't you tell me it was that serious?" She didn't respond. Let him sweat. Let him try to explain the champagne on his breath. By the time Julian arrived, disheveled and pretending anguish, Ilara was a different woman. She met him in the family lounge, still in her robe, but now wrapped in an invisible armor. "Ilara, I came as soon as he began, reaching for her. She took a step back, her gaze flat. "The client must have been very understanding, letting you leave a critical deal." He flinched. "It wrapped up early. How is he? Can I see him?" "Not yet." She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a thick envelope, handed to her by a courier minutes before. She held it out to him. "This is for you." Julian took it, confusion on his face. He tore it open, his face drained of color as he scanned the top document, a petition for divorce citing adultery and endangerment of a child. Beneath it were bank freeze notices and a copy of their prenuptial agreement, the devastating clauses highlighted in yellow. "What? What is this?" he stammered, his voice rising. "You can't be serious. Not now." "I have never been more serious," Ilara said, her voice low and lethal. "You chose your strategy session. I chose our son. Now you get to live with the consequences of your choice. Your keys to the penthouse are deactivated, your cards are frozen, your firm will be served with papers regarding the misappropriation of joint marital assets, namely the bonus you used for that Cartier watch you were flaunting last night." His jaw dropped. "You're having me followed? You're insane." "No," I corrected him calmly. "I'm thorough, and I'm done. You'll be hearing from Agatha Blackwood's office. Don't come near me or Leo unless it's through our lawyers." She turned and walked back towards the ICU, leaving him standing there clutching the papers that marked the end of his gilded life. The game was on, and Ilara, no longer a player on Julian's board, had just become the master of her own. The first move was complete. The next would be to discover just how deep his betrayals ran, and to ensure that when the dust settled, the only thing Julian would have left was the taste of his own bitter regrets. The suspense of his hidden life was just beginning to unravel, and she would pull every thread, no matter how dark or dangerous the truth beneath. The heavy door to the family lounge hissed shut behind her, sealing Julian and his spluttering protests away. Ilara leaned against the cool wall for a moment, the adrenaline that had sustained her ebbing, leaving a profound exhaustion in its wake. But there was no time for rest. She took a deep, steadying breath, the sterile hospital air filling her lungs, and walked back into the bright, beeping sanctuary of the PICU. Leo looked so small, swamped by wires and the crisp white sheets, but color was returning to his cheeks, a faint pink beneath the pallor. A nurse adjusted a monitor. "He's a fighter, your little man. Vital signs are stabilizing nicely." "Thank you," Ilara whispered, the words thick with an emotion she couldn't name. Gratitude, rage, love, all fused together. Her phone vibrated silently in her pocket. Silas. She stepped into the hallway, a quiet alcove near a window overlooking the awakening city. "Tell me," she answered, her voice low. "Your hunch was right." Silas's voice was a calm, gravelly rumble. No greeting, just facts. "The phone records show a cluster of calls and texts to a single unlisted number over the past 6 months, intensifying in the last 8 weeks. Last night, a 90-minute call from his hotel landline to that same number, ending at 12:45 a.m. right before you called him. Ilara closed her eyes. 90 minutes. While she'd been holding a cooling cloth to her forehead, Julian had been laughing, whispering, making plans. The expenses are more interesting, Silas continued. 2 first-class tickets to Barbados for next week, under his name, and an E. Shaw. Hotel reservation for the Royal Palm, the honeymoon suite, paid with the company Platinum card, flagged as a client development retreat. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning an escape, a romantic getaway while she presumed he was at a mining conference in Toronto. The audacity was breathtaking. "And the server?" asked she. "I'm in," Silas said simply. "His firm's security is good, for amateurs. He's been diverting small percentages from several client retainers into a shadow account. Sloppy, but clever. Over 2 years, it adds up to a significant sum, enough to fund a new start, perhaps." So it was all premeditated. The emotional betrayal was one wound. This financial treason, this calculated theft from their shared future and from his own clients, was another, deeper cut. "I need copies of everything, Sai. Bank statements, transfer logs, the travel itineraries, everything." "Already compiling. I'll send a secure packet to Agatha. There's one more thing." A rare hesitation in her brother's voice. "What?" "The unlisted number? I did a deeper dig. It's not just registered to Evelyn Shaw. It's part of a family plan. The primary account holder is Robert Shaw." Ilara's blood ran cold. Robert Shaw was Julian's most important client, the cornerstone of his fledgling investment firm, the man's account that had catapulted Julian from a talented analyst to a sought-after portfolio manager. Evelyn wasn't just a junior partner. She was the client's daughter. This wasn't a tawdry affair. It was a strategic merger. Julian was trading up, his wife and sick child, for a direct line to the Shaw fortune and influence. Leo's crisis had simply been an inconvenient piece of collateral damage. "I see," Ilara said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Thank you, Silas." She ended the call and stood at the window, watching the city come to life. The rising sun glinted off the glass towers, one of which housed Julian's sleek, pretentious office. He'd mortgaged everything, their love, his integrity, his son's safety, to climb a few floors higher in that very building, and he thought he'd gotten away with it. A new, more chilling layer of suspense unfurled within her. This wasn't just about catching a cheating husband. It was about unmasking a fraud who had entangled himself with a powerful, potentially dangerous family. The Shaws wouldn't take a scandal lightly. Julian's betrayal had just placed them all on a much more dangerous board. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She answered. "Ilara Vance?" A smooth, cultured female voice. "Yes." "This is Evelyn Shaw." The voice was pleasant, confident, devoid of any hint of guilt or awkwardness. "I'm so sorry to hear about your son. Julian is just devastated." Ilara's grip tightened on the phone. The gall was astronomical. "Is he?" she replied, her tone as polished and cool as Evelyn's. "Absolutely. He's a wonderful father. This must be so hard for you." A subtle emphasis on "you," drawing a line between them. "I'm calling because Julian mentioned some confusion about his whereabouts last night. He was with me and my father, Robert Shaw. We were finalizing the details for a very sensitive, confidential merger. Julian's discretion is paramount to us. I'm sure you understand how harmful any misunderstandings could be to his career, to everyone involved." It was a threat, velvet-wrapped but unmistakable. Keep quiet, or we'll destroy him and take you down too. Ilara felt a smile touch her lips, one that held no warmth. "No confusion at all, Evelyn. I have a very clear understanding of where Julian was and with whom. Thank you for clarifying the business nature of your relationship. I'll be sure to pass that along to my lawyer, Agatha Blackwood. You may have heard of her." A beat of silence on the other end. The name Agatha Blackwood was a bucket of ice water in high society circles. "I see," Evelyn said, her voice losing a fraction of her smoothness. "Well, I just wanted to clear the air, for Julian's sake." "The air is perfectly clear from where I'm standing. Goodbye, Evelyn." She hung up, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a fierce, exhilarated clarity. The enemy had revealed themselves, thinking to intimidate her. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Julian appeared at the end of the corridor, looking haggard. He'd clearly been on the phone himself, probably with Evelyn or a panicked call to his own lawyer. He approached, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. "Ilara, please, we need to talk. This is insane. You can't freeze everything. The firm will collapse." "That's the idea," she said, not looking at him, her eyes on Leo through the glass. "It's not just me," he hissed, stepping closer, dropping his voice. "The Shaws, Robert Shaw. If this blows up, he'll ruin us. He'll ruin you. He has the power to make you unemployable, to tie up the divorce in courts for a decade. Is that what you want for Leo?" She finally turned to face him. The man she'd loved, whose dreams she'd championed, now looked like a stranger, a desperate, hollow-eyed stranger. "What I want for Leo," she said slowly, "is a father who doesn't see him as a liability, a father who doesn't lie and steal and whore himself out for a better deal. You made your choice, Julian. You chose the Shaws. Now you get to live with their protection and their price." He recoiled as if slapped. "You have no proof of anything." "I have the hotel bills, Julian, the flight to Barbados, the money you've been skimming, the 90-minute phone call last night. I know about the shadow account. I know Evelyn Shaw is Robert Shaw. Did you think I was just sitting at home waiting for you? I was building the life you wanted, and I know every brick in its foundation, including the rotten ones you thought were hidden." His face went from pale to ashen. The cocky denial melted into raw panic. "Ilara, baby, please. It was a mistake, a stupid midlife crisis. She means nothing. It's you I love. It's Leo." "Don't," she cut him off, her voice like shards of glass. "Don't you dare say his name. You forfeited that right when you called his life domestic drama. Now get out. Your visitation, if any, will be determined by a judge, and if you or your new partners try to threaten me or my son again, I won't just take your money and your company. I will personally make sure every person in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are. A man who abandons his sick child, a thief, a fraud. Now get out." He stood there, trembling, his world collapsing around him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, with a last wild look at Leo's room, he turned and stumbled down the corridor. Ilara watched him go, the suspense of the immediate confrontation over, but a deeper, more perilous game now begun. She had struck the first blow, but the Shaws were not Julian. They were a fortress of money and influence, and Evelyn's phone call was a declaration of war. She turned back to the window. The sun was fully up now, illuminating the city in a hard, clear light. No more shadows, no more lies. She would protect Leo, and she would reclaim her life. But the path ahead was no longer just about divorce. It was about survival against an enemy who had everything to lose. And enemies with everything to lose are the most dangerous kind. The real drama was just beginning. The next 48 hours were a strange, suspended reality. Ilara existed in a bubble of antiseptic scent and soft monitor beeps, anchored to the chair by Leo's bed. He slept, his small chest rising and falling with the help of oxygen, but the doctor was cautiously optimistic. The antibiotics were winning. Meanwhile, the world outside the PICU walls erupted. Her phone, perpetually on silent, lit up with a barrage of notifications she ignored. Agatha had moved with terrifying efficiency. By noon on that first day, Julian's financial life had been systematically dismantled. The joint accounts were frozen, as promised. The lines of credit to his firm were recalled. The penthouse locks were changed, and a discreet security team hired by Silas now monitored the building's entrances. But it was the ripple effects that began to create a suspense of their own. The first sign came from Meredith, Alara's one remaining friend from her old art world life, who texted, "Elle just had the weirdest lunch, ran into Liza Carlton, who's thick with the Shaw crowd. She was whispering that Julian's firm is on the brink, that there's been some creative accounting, and that you've gone completely off the deep end, locking him out and making wild accusations. She said Robert Shaw is furious at the disruption." Alara didn't respond. The narrative was being shaped already. She was the hysterical, vengeful wife. Julian and the Shaws were the aggrieved parties. Then, a courier arrived at the hospital front desk with a letter on thick, embossed stationery. Shaw Capital Management. It was from Robert Shaw himself. "Dear Mrs. Vance, I write with concern regarding the recent difficulties between you and Julian. While personal matters are just that, the stability of his firm, in which I am a significant investor, is of paramount professional importance to me. I understand emotions are high, especially with your son's illness, for which I extend my sincerest hopes for a full recovery. However, rash actions can have devastating and unintended consequences. I would like to offer my offices as a neutral ground for a mediated discussion to ensure this situation is resolved with the discretion and dignity all parties deserve. My daughter Evelyn, who has worked closely with Julian, can also be present to provide clarity on their purely professional partnership, which seems to have been tragically misunderstood. I urge you to consider this before legal machinations create irreparable damage. Sincerely, Robert Shaw." It was a masterpiece of intimidation disguised as benevolence, a mediated discussion on his turf with his daughter present to gaslight her about the affair, all under the veiled threat of unintended consequences. The letter breathed power and entitlement. It made Julian's panicked bluster seem childish. Alara folded the letter neatly and placed it in her bag, next to the divorce papers, a trophy. The next attack was more direct. Around midnight, as she dozed fitfully in the recliner, her phone buzzed. Not a call, but a series of encrypted image files sent from Silas. She opened them, the glow of the screen illuminating her weary face. They were screenshots from the firm's secure server, but not of financials. They were drafts of internal memos written by Julian in the last month. Memo, re Vance Joint Assets. One paragraph was highlighted. Given Alara's fragile mental state since stepping back from her career and her increasingly obsessive focus on our son's minor health issues, there is a credible concern regarding her fitness to manage shared capital. I recommend a psychological evaluation be considered prior to any significant disbursements. Her breath caught. He'd been laying the groundwork, painting her as unstable, an unfit mother, to gain control of everything. The next image was an email to Evelyn, dated 2 weeks prior. "The Barbados paperwork is finalized. A clean break. By the time she realizes it's not a conference, we'll be unreachable. She'll have the penthouse and the nanny's number. It's more than she contributed." The coldness of it was a physical blow. He hadn't just planned to leave. He'd planned to vanish, leaving her with an empty shell of a life and a story about a business trip gone long. The final image was the most chilling. It was a clinical, dispassionate risk assessment, likely for Robert Shaw's eyes. Listed under potential liabilities was Subject A, Alara Vance, assets, personal, minimal, threat level, low, containment strategy, financial pressure, social isolation, in progress, potential leveraging of medical consensus regarding Subject B's, Leo Vance's, chronic condition to suggest maternal instability. He wasn't just leaving her. He and the Shaws had been conducting a covert operation to neutralize her. Her son's medical crisis was being weaponized against her. The suspense was no longer about if they would strike, but how and when the next blow would land. The hospital, which had felt like a fortress, now felt exposed. What if they sent a doctor, someone on Robert Shaw's payroll, to question her decisions, to suggest Leo needed to be in a different facility? The paranoia was instinctual, a survival response to the evidence in her hands. She texted Silas, "Can you get me 24/7 security here? Discreet, not just for me, for Leo's medical team." His reply was immediate. Already in motion, 2 men outside the PICU, posing as family, a nurse on the inside, vetted and paid by us. She let out a shuddering breath. She wasn't alone. On the 3rd day, Leo opened his eyes. They were foggy with medication, but they focused on her face. "Mama?" His voice was a dry croak. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed finally spilled over. "I'm here, my love, right here." He was weak, but he was present. The worst of the medical battle was over. Now the other war began in earnest. As if on cue, Agatha arrived, a small, immaculate hurricane in navy suit. She swept into the family lounge, kissed Alara on the cheek, and got down to business. "He's filed a response." Agatha opened a sleek tablet, "denies all infidelity, claims the trip was for a confidential client retreat, and is petitioning for an emergency hearing to unfreeze the assets, citing irreparable harm to his business and, laughably, his ability to provide for his son." Ilara's blood ran cold. He wants custody? Not full custody, joint legal. It's a standard power play, a way to grind you down and gain leverage over the financial settlement. If he has a say in Leo's medical care, education, etc., he can make your life a living hell with constant challenges, and the judge assigned— Agatha's lips thinned. Judge Harold Winslow, known for being old school, dislikes messy public drama, favors family unity. Robert Shaw plays golf with him at Augusta. This was the first tangible move on the legal board, and it was devastating. They had home court advantage. "We need to shift the narrative," Alara said, her mind racing, "before this hearing." "Exactly," Agatha agreed. "We have the financial fraud. That's powerful, but it's complex. We need something visceral, something that makes Julian's character indisputably vile to even an old-school judge." Alara thought of the memos, the cold calculus of the risk assessment. What if we could prove he was planning to abandon us, not just emotionally, but literally, that he saw Leo's illness as a liability? Agatha's eyes glittered. That would be perfect, but the server evidence is good. It's not a smoking gun he can't explain away as business contingency planning. We need something with a timestamp, something from that night. An idea, dark and risky, began to form in Alara's mind. Julian was panicking. Panicked people made mistakes. They reached for lifelines. "What if," Alara said slowly, "we gave him a chance to hang himself?" Agatha leaned forward. "I'm listening. He's desperate to talk to me, to explain. What if I let him, in a controlled environment, somewhere we can record everything?" "One-party consent state," Agatha nodded. "It's admissible, but he'll be careful. He'll have a lawyer advising him to say nothing." "He won't be able to help himself," Alara said, a bitter certainty in her voice. "He's always believed he could talk his way out of anything. He'll want to justify, to explain how this is all a misunderstanding, how I've forced his hand. He'll want to play the victim, and to do that, he'll have to reveal his version of the truth." A plan coalesced, fragile and dangerous. She would meet him. She would be the heartbroken, confused wife, willing to listen. She would wear a wire. The suspense now had a new pounding rhythm. It was no longer about waiting for their attack, but about walking into the lion's den to plant a trap. She would use his own condescension, his belief in her weakness, against him. She texted Julian, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her heart. "Leo is awake. He's asking for you. I'm not sure what's happening anymore. Can we talk? Just us, no lawyers. Tonight, 7 p.m., the conservatory at the Botanical Gardens. It's quiet." She held her breath. The bait was set. Would he take it? The reply came 10 minutes later, just as Agatha was reviewing the tiny recording device a tech from Silas's team had delivered. "I'll be there. Thank you, Alara. We can fix this." Alara looked at Agatha. The older woman's face was grim. "Remember," Agatha said, "don't push. Let him talk. Let him confess. Your only job is to be the woman he thinks you are." Alara nodded, slipping the tiny device into the lining of her jacket. The woman he thought she was, fragile, dependent, lost without him, was a costume she would don one last time. Tonight, in the shadowy, humid silence of the conservatory, she would become his ghost, and she would lure him into speaking his own damnation into existence. The danger was acute. If he suspected the trap, if he was smarter than she gave him credit for, the gamble could backfire spectacularly. But the greater danger was in doing nothing and letting Robert Shaw's machinery grind her and Leo into dust. As dusk fell, she kissed Leo's sleeping forehead, nodded to the plainclothes guard by the door, and walked out into the evening. The city lights sparkled, indifferent. She was walking into a confrontation laced with more suspense than any thriller because the stakes were her son's future, and the villain knew her deepest vulnerabilities. She was about to have a conversation with the man who had vowed to love her, and she was armed with nothing but a lie and a wire. The gardens awaited, a glass jungle under the stars, where truths would be hunted, and a marriage would be given its final, lethal dose of poison. The conservatory was a world of hushed, dripping green. Under the vaulted glass ceiling, the humid air clung to Alara's skin like a second sheath. The scent of loam and night-blooming jasmine was overwhelming, a sensory cloak that felt both primal and secretive. She chose a bench near a towering philodendron, its leaves broad and dark, providing a sense of shelter. The tiny recorder, a smooth, cold disc, was secured inside the inner pocket of her lightweight blazer, its mic a minuscule pinhole near the button. She was 10 minutes early, a lifetime to steady her nerves. She focused on the image of Leo, awake, sipping apple juice through a straw, giving her a weak thumbs up. That was her anchor. That was the reason for this dangerous charade. At precisely 7 p.m., a silhouette appeared at the far end of the palm-lined path. Julian. He walked with a studied casualness, but his shoulders were tight, his head on a swivel. He'd come alone. Good. He still believed he could control this. He saw her, and his face arranged itself into an expression of pained concern. He slid onto the bench beside her, leaving a careful foot of space between them. "Alara, you look exhausted." "Our son almost died," she said flatly, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on the koi pond ahead. "It's tiring." He flinched. "Don't say that. He's going to be fine. And God, Alara, I've been going out of my mind. The things you're doing, freezing everything, Agatha Blackwood, you're tearing our family apart." Our family. The audacity of the phrase after his memos, after Barbados, sent a spike of white-hot anger through her. She swallowed it, letting her shoulders slump. "Our son almost died, Julian." "You left us, Julian, when I needed you most." "I didn't leave," he protested, his voice taking on the familiar, reasonable tone he used to explain market fluctuations. "I was working for us, for Leo's future. The Shaw account is everything. Robert Shaw is not a man you keep waiting. Evelyn was just facilitating the meeting." "Evelyn?" Alara echoed, injecting a tremor in her voice. "She called me. She was very protective of you." He seized on this, mistaking her tremor for jealousy. "See?" That's all this is, a professional misunderstanding that spiraled because you were scared and alone. I get it. But now you're listening to Agatha Blackwood, who makes her fortune destroying families. She's filling your head with nonsense. He shifted closer, his voice dropping to an intimate, coaxing register. Baby, look at me. This is us. We built a life. We have a son. So I've been stressed, distracted. Maybe I've been a little insensitive. But this? Legal warfare? It's madness. You need to call off the dogs. Unfreeze the accounts. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. The performance was masterful. The repentant husband, the misunderstood provider. He was giving her the script for reconciliation, the easy way out. All she had to do was play the forgiving wife. "How do I fix the fact that you weren't there, Julian?" she whispered, a real tear escaping, a tear of pure, undiluted fury she let him misinterpret as grief. "He was seizing, Julian. I thought I was losing him, and you were drinking champagne." The accusation hung in the humid air. The mask of concern on his face slipped for a microsecond, revealing a flash of pure irritation. He recovered quickly. That was client management. One glass. For God's sake, Ilara, do you think I would be celebrating if I knew how serious it was? You said fever. You didn't say meningitis. He was rewriting history, shifting the blame to her for not communicating the crisis adequately. "I called you 12 times. I was in a closed-door session. My phone was on silent. I called back as soon as I saw the missed calls." A lie. The phone record showed no return call until hours later. She let the silence stretch, a tense, aching thing. Then she asked, her voice small, "Were you going to leave me?" He sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. "Is this about Barbados? It's a business development trip, a high-level brainstorming session with Shaw and his top advisors in a neutral location. Evelyn was tasked with the logistics. That's it." "And the hotel room? The honeymoon suite?" He went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "It doesn't matter. Is it true?" He ran a hand through his hair, the picture of a man cornered by irrationality. "Yes, it's a suite. It's where Shaw always stays. He books out the entire top floor for his team. This is how things work at this level, Ilara. You wouldn't understand. You've been out of that world for years." The condescension was like a key turning in a lock. It unlocked the part he expected, the insecure, left-behind wife. She leaned into it. "So, you and Evelyn, it's really just work?" He saw his opening and took it, his voice softening into something almost pitying. "Evelyn is a sharp, ambitious kid. She's Robert's eyes and ears. My job is to keep her happy, to keep her father invested. That's all. You think I'd risk everything we have for what? A fling?" He shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "You're my wife, Leo's mother. That's real. This," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the conservatory, the lawsuit, "this is just noise, stress-induced paranoia." He was so close now, his knee almost touching hers. The smell of his cologne, once so comforting, made her stomach turn. He was weaving a story where he was the heroic provider, misunderstood by his emotionally fragile wife, besieged by a predatory lawyer. It was a story Judge Harold Winslow might very well believe. She needed more. She needed the knife. "Agatha says you want shared custody," she said, letting her voice break. "That you're telling the court I'm unstable, that I'm an unfit mother because of how I handled Leo's health." His eyes flickered. Caught. He hadn't expected her to know the legal filing so soon. He reached out, as if to take her hand, then pulled back, a calculated gesture of wounded restraint. "I had to protect myself, Ilara. Your actions, freezing me out, making wild accusations, Agatha is clearly pushing you toward a dramatic break. A judge needs to see that I'm a fit, concerned father, that I want what's best for Leo, even if you're being led down a destructive path. It's a legal formality. It doesn't mean I don't think you're a wonderful mother." It was a breathtaking display of doublespeak. The threat was veiled in compassion, the assault disguised as protection. She looked down at her hands, playing her final card. Robert Shaw wrote to me. He offered to mediate. He said there'd be consequences if this gets messy. Julian's face darkened. He contacted you directly? The control in his voice slipped, revealing a threat of fear. Robert Shaw was his golden goose, and the goose was rattled. Ilara, listen to me. You cannot engage with him. You don't know how he operates. That letter is a warning. If you proceed with this vendetta, he won't just come after you. He'll come after you. He'll tie you up in so much litigation, you'll be bankrupt. He'll use his influence to question your custody. He can make things very, very difficult. There it was. The unvarnished threat, no longer from the aggrieved husband, but from the panicked partner in crime. He was no longer denying the alliance, he was describing its power. So I should just drop everything, sign whatever you want, let you go to Barbados with your team? She infused the last word with just enough sarcasm to prick his ego. He took the bait. His patience snapped. The concerned facade evaporated, replaced by the cold, strategic man from the memos. Yes, he hissed, leaning in, his eyes hard. That's exactly what you should do, because the alternative is you standing alone against Shaw Capital, and you will lose. You will lose everything. The penthouse, he'll find a way to lean it. Your reputation, he'll bury it. And Leo? He let the name hang, a weapon. Do you want him caught in the middle of a legal war that will follow him for years? Do you want his mother to be a social pariah, broke and bitter? Or do you want him to have a peaceful life, with parents who can be civil, with a father who can provide him every opportunity? It was a confession, not of adultery in a sordid physical sense, but of something colder, a calculated betrayal where his family was a line item, a liability to be managed or shed. He was offering her a choice: surrender quietly and retain some shred of a comfortable life, or fight and be annihilated by forces she couldn't comprehend. Ilara finally looked at him, meeting his gaze directly. All pretense of fragility fell away. The tears were gone. Her eyes were dry, clear, and as hard as the glass dome above them. You've just answered every question I had, Julian, she said, her voice quiet, steady, and lethally calm. Thank you. The confusion on his face was almost comical, swiftly followed by dawning horror as his eyes dropped to the slight bulge in her blazer pocket. What have you done? He whispered, the blood draining from his face. I've ensured that Judge Winslow, she said, standing up, will hear exactly the kind of father you are. Not the stressed provider, not the misunderstood husband, the man who views his son as a pawn and his wife as an obstacle to be neutralized, the man who conspires with his clients to threaten and intimidate, the man who planned to disappear to Barbados while his child fought for his life. She took a step back, looking down at him where he sat, frozen. You've just declared war, Julian, and you have no idea who you're fighting. She turned and walked away, the squelch of her shoes on the damp gravel path being the only sound. She didn't look back. She could feel his stunned, venomous gaze on her back, but she didn't care. The tiny recorder in her pocket felt like a live coal, a captured heartbeat of his own monstrous truth. The suspense of the meeting was over. She had her weapon. But as she emerged from the humid jungle into the cool night air, the greater suspense tightened its grip. Julian was cornered. Robert Shaw was implicated. The recording was a bomb. And now she had to decide when to detonate it, knowing the explosion would likely bring the whole glass house of Shaw's influence down upon her head. The confrontation was just the beginning. The retaliation would be what truly tested her. The drive back to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. The cool night air through the car window did nothing to calm the feverish triumph humming under her skin. She had it. His voice, cold and threatening, captured on a digital file. It was more damning than any financial record, more visceral than any hotel receipt. Silas was waiting for her in the hospital's underground parking garage, leaning against a nondescript sedan. He straightened as she approached, his face unreadable in the fluorescent light. Without a word, she handed him the tiny recorder. He slipped it into a shielded case, a Faraday pouch, that would block any remote attempts to wipe or interfere with it. "It's all there," she said, her voice sounding strangely detached. "The threats, the intimidation." He practically spelled out the conspiracy with Shaw Capital. Silas gave a slow nod. "Agatha's ready. She's drafting a supplemental filing now." But he hesitated, a rare thing for him. Playing the tape is a declaration of total war. Shaw won't just be angry, he'll be existential. He'll see it as a direct attack on his empire, his daughter. He'll escalate in ways we might not anticipate.
"I know," Alara said, the weight of it settling on her shoulders. "But what's the alternative? Let them paint me as insane and take my son? Let Julian walk away with everything?"
"No alternative," Silas agreed, his voice grim. "Just preparation. The security on Leo is solid. On you, it needs to be tighter. Starting now." He gestured to the sedan. A woman got out from the driver's side, mid-40s, with a calm, observant face and an athletic build disguised by casual clothes. "This is Cora. She's your new shadow. Ex-Special Forces, Close Protection Specialist. She goes where you go, until I say otherwise." Alara didn't argue. The world had shifted. Paranoia was now prudence. Back in Leo's room, the night passed with a new tension. Every rustle from the corridor, every change in the rhythm of the monitors made her pulse jump. Cora positioned herself just outside the door, a silent, reassuring sentinel. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. Not a call, but a notification from the building management app for the penthouse. Motion detected, master bedroom. Her breath caught. She pulled up the live feed from the discreet camera she'd had Silas install in a smoke detector years ago after a series of mysterious late-night alarms she now suspected were Julian testing her. The feed was dark, but infrared showed a figure moving with frantic, jerky movements. Julian. He was tearing through their walk-in closet, throwing her old suitcases aside, yanking drawers open. He was looking for something. Then he went to her vanity, the one she rarely used anymore. He didn't look at the perfume bottles or jewelry trays. His hands went underneath, feeling along the wooden seam. With a sharp tug, he pried up a false bottom she didn't know existed. From the hidden compartment, he pulled out a small, fireproof lockbox. Alara's blood ran cold. She'd never seen that box before. Julian fumbled with a key from his keychain, opened it, and pulled out a thick sheaf of documents. Even in the grainy infrared, she could recognize old passports, what looked like birth certificates, and a deed. He shuffled through them, his shoulders flumping in what looked like frustration. He was searching for something specific, and he wasn't finding it. He shoved the documents back, replaced the false bottom, and hurried out of the frame. A few minutes later, the app notified her the front door had been opened and closed. What was in that box? What was he looking for? The suspense coiled tighter, a new mystery layered atop the existing danger. He wasn't just lashing out. He was hunting for something he believed she had, or that was hidden in their home. She forwarded the video clip to Silas with a 2-word message. "Explain this." His reply came at dawn. "The box is a mystery. The deed is for a parcel of land in New Mexico, purchased by your grandfather. I'm digging. Stay alert." The next morning, the legal world struck back. Agatha called, her voice tight. "Winslow has moved the emergency hearing up. Today, 2 p.m. He's concerned about the volatility. Julian's counsel has submitted an urgent addendum to their filing. They're alleging you have a history of psychological instability and are refusing to disclose Leo's full medical records, implying you may be obstructing necessary care." "That's insane," Alara hissed, keeping her voice low so Leo, who was watching cartoons, wouldn't hear. "It's strategic. They're creating a smokescreen, muddy the waters before we can introduce our evidence. We need to file the supplemental with the recording now to force the judge to listen before he forms an opinion." "Do it," Alara said. "There's a catch. Agatha said grimly. Winslow's clerk called. The judge wants to see the boy, today, before the hearing, in his chambers. A chill swept through Alara. This was Shaw move. Alara was certain of it. Apply pressure through the bench. Get Leo into a controlled, intimidating setting. See how the unstable mother behaved under stress. Perhaps even elicit something from Leo they could twist. I don't have a choice, do I? No, Agatha said grimly. But we'll be right outside, and Cora goes with you to the courthouse. The next few hours were a nightmare of preparation. She gently explained to Leo that they had to see a kind of doctor who was a judge, and that Daddy would be there too. Leo's lower lip trembled. Is Daddy still mad? It's going to be okay, sweetheart, she promised, her heart breaking. Judge Harold Winslow's chambers were the opposite of the sterile hospital, a cavernous room paneled in dark oak, smelling of lemon polish and old cigar smoke. It reeked of entrenched masculine authority. Winslow himself sat behind a massive desk, a bulldog of a man with shrewd, unsmiling eyes. Julian was already there, standing stiffly by the window. He looked pale but composed, the picture of a responsible father concerned for his son. He didn't look at Alara when she walked in, holding Leo's hand, Cora stopping firmly at the outer office door. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Vance, please, sit. He gestured to 2 chairs facing the desk. He peered at Leo, who hid behind Alara's legs. Come here, son. Let's have a look at you. Leo clung tighter. Alara coaxed him forward slightly. It's okay. The judge just wants to say hello. Winslow's gaze was assessing, not unkind, but intensely probing. He looks pale. You say he's recovering from a serious infection? Yes, Your Honor. Bacterial meningitis. He was discharged from the PICU only yesterday. And you have him in your sole care at the moment? Yes, at a temporary rental. The penthouse is contested. Winslow grunted. Mr. Vance, you've expressed concern about the boy's medical management. Explain. Julian leaned forward, oozing sincerity. Your Honor, I'm just worried. Alara has always been highly strung. Since Leo's birth, she's become hyper-vigilant, seeing crises in every sniffle. I fear her anxiety may cloud her judgment. I want what's best for Leo. 2 calm, rational parents making decisions together. It was a masterful performance, reframing her maternal instinct as pathology. And the events of the other night? Winslow asked, his eyes flicking to Alara. A tragic misunderstanding, Julian said smoothly. I was in a critical meeting. By the time I realized the severity, I raced to the hospital. Alara had already taken drastic legal action, influenced, I believe, by her attorney. Winslow turned his heavy gaze to Alara. You filed an emergency freeze and a divorce petition within hours of his admission. That is precipitous. Alara kept her voice level, her hand on Leo's back. My priority was my son's life, Your Honor. His father was unavailable. My subsequent actions were to protect my son from further instability and from financial depletion that was already occurring. Alleged financial depletion, Julian interjected smoothly. Alleged, Winslow echoed, making a note. He peered at Leo again. Leo, do you like staying with your mama?
Leo nodded silently, his thumb creeping toward his mouth. Is she a good mama? Another nod, more vigorous. And your daddy? Do you want to see him? Leo looked at Julian, then buried his face in Alara's side. The silent rejection was more eloquent than any words. Julian's mask faltered, a flicker of real anger and hurt in his eyes. Winslow sat back, steepling his fingers. I see a sick little boy who needs his mother. I also see allegations of serious marital misconduct and financial chicanery that require thorough investigation. Until that investigation is complete and until Leo is fully recovered, I am issuing a temporary order. Alara held her breath. Primary physical custody remains with the mother. The father is granted supervised visitation to be arranged through a court-appointed professional twice weekly for 2 hours.
All financial orders currently in place will remain, pending a full forensic audit. He looked pointedly at Julian. Mr. Vance, you will fully cooperate with that audit. Any further attempts to pressure or intimidate Mrs. Vance, directly or through third parties, will be viewed most dimly. Do I make myself clear? Julian's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle twitched. Yes, Your Honor. The emergency hearing this afternoon is hereby canceled. We will reconvene for a status conference in 30 days. You are dismissed. It was a victory, but a precarious one. Winslow hadn't been swayed by Julian's performance, but he was clearly wary of the mess. He'd bought them time, but the threat of Shaw's influence still loomed in the very air of the chamber. As they walked out, Julian fell into step beside her in the corridor, his voice a low, venomous hiss meant only for her ears. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. That recording? Shaw has people who can make evidence disappear, who can make people disappear. You're playing with forces you can't possibly comprehend. Before she could respond, Cora was between them, a solid, silent wall. Step back, sir. Julian glared, then turned on his heel and strode away. Alara's hands were shaking as she buckled Leo into his car seat. The judge had seen through Julian, for now, but Julian's warning echoed. Make people disappear. The hidden lockbox, the hunted look on Julian's face on the video, the sheer, ruthless power of Robert Shaw. The suspense was no longer just about custody or money. It was about survival, in a very literal sense. She had the recording, a weapon, but her enemies were now revealed as men with unlimited resources and perhaps a willingness to cross lines she hadn't even considered. The game had just moved to a much darker, more dangerous board. The 30-day reprieve was a fragile bubble of calm in a gathering storm. Alara moved herself and Leo to a secure, unlisted apartment Silas had arranged, a bland, fortified box in a building with biometric security, and a doorman who was actually one of Cora's colleagues. Leo's strength returned day by day, his laughter beginning to chase away the shadows of illness, though he was quieter, more clingy. Agatha worked with the grim efficiency of a general. The recording from the conservatory was transcribed, authenticated by a forensic audio expert, and filed with the court. Its impact was seismic, but contained. Judge Winslow, upon reviewing it, had expanded the forensic audit to include Shaw Capital's dealings with Julian's firm and issued a gag order citing the inflammatory and potentially defamatory nature of the threats against a minor's parent. It was a legal victory, but it also meant the public war was on hold, forcing the conflict into deeper, darker channels. The lockbox from the penthouse yielded its secrets slowly, and they were more unsettling than Alara could have imagined. Silas had had days of digital and physical excavation and laid it out for her in the sterile safety of his own office. The land in New Mexico, he said, pulling up satellite images on a large screen, 200 acres of high desert, worthless on paper, but it sits atop a massive, untapped aquifer. A shell company, Hydra Solutions, has been trying to acquire all the surrounding parcels for 3 years. Their offers have been predatory, threatening. The holdout? Your grandfather's trust, which you inherited. You're the holdout, Alara. You just didn't know it. Alara stared at the stark, beautiful landscape. What does this have to do with Julian? Hydra Solutions is a wholly owned subsidiary of Shaw Capital Ventures. Robert Shaw needs that water for a speculative green energy project, a hydrogen fuel plant. It's the cornerstone of his legacy play. Without that land, the project fails. The pieces crashed together with dizzying force. Julian married me not knowing about the land, but he found out from the documents in that box. Likely, Silas nodded, your grandfather was a secretive man. He hid the asset, probably to protect it from exactly this kind of corporate raiding. Julian must have stumbled upon the deed or an old reference. When he realized its value, and more importantly, the value to Shaw, it changed everything. You weren't just his wife, you were the key to his ultimate prize. His affair with Evelyn Shaw wasn't just about ambition or lust. It was a strategic merger to gain control of your asset through marriage into the Shaw family. Your son's illness? It was an inconvenient timing issue in a much larger, colder transaction. The betrayal deepened, becoming geological in its scale. Her marriage, her son, had been collateral in a real estate play. "And now?" Alara asked, her voice hollow. "Now, Shaw knows you know, and he knows the land is in your name, protected by a trust that even Julian couldn't breach without your signature. You are no longer just an inconvenient ex-wife. You are the single point of failure for a billion-dollar project." The danger was no longer abstract. It was specific, and it was about a piece of earth she'd never even seen. The first sign of this new front came not as a threat, but as an offer. A man named Alastair Croft, a lawyer representing the Vance Family Heritage Trust, contacted Agatha. He was smooth, apologetic. There had been a long-standing administrative oversight. The trust taxes on the New Mexico parcel had allegedly gone unpaid for years. To avoid seizure by the state, a quiet, expedited sale to a conservation group was being arranged. All she needed to do was sign the papers to clear the liability. It was a trap. Sign, and she'd lose the land for pennies. Refuse, and they'd tie her up in a fake tax lien battle. "We fight it," Alara told Agatha. "Expose it as fraud. It will be expensive, and Shaw has endless resources to drag it out. I don't care. That land is my grandfather's, it's mine, and it's my leverage."
The next attack was more visceral. One afternoon, returning from a supervised visit with Julian at a neutrally themed family center, Leo was unusually quiet. That night, as she bathed him, he looked up at her with big, serious eyes. "Daddy said we might go on a big trip soon, on a plane, to see big cactuses. He said it would be an adventure, just me and him." Ilara's blood turned to ice. Supervised visitation did not include cross-country travel. This was grooming. This was the beginning of a kidnapping narrative. He's not just fighting for custody, he's planning to take him. She reported it to the court supervisor and Agatha immediately. The supervisor's notes were amended, but it was hearsay warning from a 4-year-old. Not enough to change orders, only enough to tighten the coil of fear around Ilara's heart. The pressure escalated in small, corrosive ways. A reputable art gallery where Ilara had been tentatively discussing a curatorship role suddenly became fully staffed. Her credit score was flagged for a bizarre, fraudulent identity theft case that took weeks to unravel. A series of anonymous, sinister online reviews appeared for the pediatric clinic that had treated Leo, questioning their diagnosis and care, hinting at a mother's manipulation. Shaw was using his influence to isolate her, to erode her credibility, and to drain her resources. It was a war of attrition, and he had a bigger army. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. Silas called, his voice stripped of its usual calm. "They found the nurse, Amanda, the one we had on the inside at the hospital. She was in a hit-and-run last night. She's in a coma. The police are calling it an accident. It wasn't." Ilara sank onto her sofa, the world tilting. They were targeting people around her, making them disappear, just as Julian had warned. "We have to strike back," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. "Not legally. They're operating outside the law now. We need to hit them where it really hurts, their reputation." He had a plan. It was reckless, dangerous, and the only move left. Shaw was hosting a legendary, ultra-exclusive charity gala at his estate in 2 days, the kind of event where billionaires, senators, and media titans mingled under chandeliers. It was the sanctum of his power. Evelyn, as the shining heir apparent, would be the undisputed star, and Julian, as his poised new consort, would be making his debut in that rarefied world. "We crash the party," Silas said. "We don't just leak the recording to the press. We play it in the middle of his ballroom.
we show that room exactly who Robert Shaw is in business with and what he's willing to threaten to get what he wants. We turn his sanctuary into a courtroom. It was madness. It could get them arrested or worse, but it would also be a spectacle they could never contain. In that room full of sharks, the smell of blood would be instant and transformative. Ilara thought of Leo, sleeping peacefully down the hall. She thought of the nurse, Amanda, lying broken in a hospital bed. She thought of the dry, precious land her grandfather had loved. She looked at Cora, who gave a single, firm nod. "We go," Ilara said. The night of the gala was clear and cold. The Shaw estate glowed on its manicured hill like a spaceship of light and money. Ilara wore a simple, stunning black gown she'd pulled from the back of her closet, a relic of her old life, a weapon from the past. Silas, in a tuxedo, looked like a particularly deadly secret agent. Cora, posing as her personal assistant, wore an earpiece and a dress with a slit high enough to conceal a tactical thigh holster. They arrived in a hired town car, using forged invitations Silas's tech wizard had created. The air at the entrance crackled with opulence and unspoken power. They passed through security, Ilara's heart hammering against her ribs. The grand ballroom was a fantasy of flowers, crystal, and the low, powerful hum of consolidated wealth. And there they were, at the center of the room, holding court. Robert Shaw, a silver-haired lion holding a tumbler of amber liquid, laughing a deep, confident laugh. Beside him, Evelyn, radiant in ice-blue silk, her hand resting possessively on the arm of Julian. He looked polished, triumphant, the hard edges of his panic sanded away by this validation. He was home. For a moment, Ilara just watched, a ghost at her own funeral. Then she caught Silas's eye. He gave a subtle signal to a man stationed by the AV control booth, another of his assets, planted earlier in the day. The string quartet finished a piece. As the polite applause faded, the master of ceremonies, a famous news anchor, stepped to the microphone to introduce Robert Shaw for his welcome speech. Instead of Shaw's voice, the cavernous room was suddenly filled with the hushed, dripping ambience of the botanical gardens, followed by Julian's voice, clear as a bell through the state-of-the-art sound system. Do you want him caught in the middle of a legal war that will follow him for years? Do you want his mother to be a social pariah, broke and bitter? Or do you want him to have a peaceful life, with parents who can be civil, with a father who can provide him every opportunity? A frozen, collective intake of breath. Hundreds of faces swiveled, confused, then horrified towards the source of the sound, and then inevitably towards Julian, whose face had gone waxen. "You're right. This is war. You just declared it." Ilara's recorded voice, cold and final. "And you have no idea who you're fighting." The recording ended with a sharp click. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, a vacuum of shock. Then, chaos. Julian was staring, wild-eyed at Ilara from across the room. Evelyn's hand had fallen from his arm as if burned. Robert Shaw's face was a terrifying mask of volcanic fury, not at the words, but at the violation, the exposure. Ilara didn't wait. She walked. Straight through the parted crowd, a path clearing before her like the Red Sea, until she stood before the trio. She looked only at Julian. "You threatened to make people disappear. You tried to steal my son's future and my grandfather's land. Here I am." Her voice, though not amplified, carried in the dead silence. She turned to Robert Shaw, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "The land is not for sale. My son is not a pawn. This war is over. You lose." With that, she turned on her heel. Silas and Cora fell in beside her, forming a phalanx. They walked out of the ballroom, through the gilded halls, and into the night, the stunned silence erupting behind them into a cacophony of scandalized whispers. The fallout was immediate and total. The gag order was meaningless now. The story, with the audio file attached, was everywhere within the hour. Billionaires' brutal threats in custody battle. Shaw Capital's dirty dealings exposed. The SEC and the Attorney General's office, previously sluggish, announced investigations into Shaw Capital and Julian's firm. The conservation group wanting the land vanished. The phantom tax liens were dismissed. Julian was arrested 2 days later on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and witness intimidation related to the nurse's accident. He would face the financial crimes later, but this was the hook that took him off the board. He looked broken, hollow as they led him away in handcuffs, his gala triumph ashes in his mouth. Evelyn Shaw was quietly removed from her position at her father's firm and shipped to an estate in Switzerland. The Shaw brand was toxified, its stock plummeting, its political allies scattering. Robert Shaw did not disappear. He retreated, a wounded but still dangerous beast, his empire crippled but not destroyed. The New Mexico project was abandoned. A cold, silent understanding passed between him and Alara through their lawyers, a stalemate. He would leave her and Leo alone, forever. A year later, the dust had settled into a new, peaceful landscape. The divorce was final, the assets divided, with Ilara receiving the bulk, including the penthouse, which she sold, and a staggering settlement that was a fraction of what Shaw had lost, but more than enough for freedom. The land in New Mexico remained hers. She visited it once with Leo, who chased lizards under the vast, endless sky. She felt her grandfather there, in the whispering wind and the resilient scrub. She and Leo lived in a sun-filled loft near the water. She had accepted a position as head curator at a pioneering contemporary art museum, a role that celebrated the very vision Julian had once dismissed. Her life was her own. One evening, she was hanging one of her own paintings, a bold, abstract piece full of defiant color, when the doorbell rang. Cora, who still handled security, gave a nod from the kitchen. It was safe. It was Malik, Agatha's protege, who had become a friend. He held a bottle of wine and a shy smile. Leo, now 5 and bursting with health, ran and hugged his legs. "Malik, you came for game night." "I did, buddy." He looked at Alara, his eyes warm. "I come bearing Chateauneuf du Pape and a deeply humiliating knowledge that I will lose at Candyland again." Ilara laughed, a real, easy sound that still sometimes surprised her. As she took the wine, their fingers brushed. A spark, gentle and promising, passed between them, not a conflagration, but the reliable glow of a hearth. Later, after Leo was asleep, victorious at Candyland, they sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The silence was comfortable. "He's doing amazingly well," Malik said. "He is. He's resilient. Takes after his mother." She looked out at the glittering skyline, once a map of her battles. The suspense was gone. The dread had lifted. In its place was a quiet certainty, hard-won and precious. The greatest revenge was not in Julian's prison cell or Shaw's ruined gala. It was here, in this piece. It was in Leo's untroubled sleep, in the paint under her fingernails, in the quiet understanding in a good man's eyes. It was a life reassembled, not from the broken pieces they left her, but from new materials of her own choosing, stronger, more beautiful, and entirely her own. The drama was over. The story that remained was simply about living, fully and without fear, under the wide, clear sky she had fought so hard to reclaim.